Are you approachable? Your insight into this question could very well determine how successful you may be in life. Our guest tonight is Laura Hollands-Steck, and she's written a book about this subject. It's called Approachability, the Key to Influencing Others. Laura is the president and an executive coach with the Growth and Leadership Center here in Silicon Valley. So Laura, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Yeah. Now, Laura, you were on the show about 3 years ago, and back then we talked about the Silicon Syndrome and how people have a tendency to marry their opposites, and we talked about bully broads and the problems in the workforce and what people can do about it. So what are you doing right now in your work?
Well, helping managers and bosses, CEOs, become more approachable so they can get the work done with the people.
Right. And have you seen a change in Silicon Valley in the past 3 years?
Oh, yes. All you have to do is read the news or be inside a company right now, and everyone has gone, pretty negative. And so as people get compressed and things are tight, people get anxious and they forget sort of all their people skills at times.
Right. So they're anxious because of the economy?
Right.
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 Now, you've written this book on approachability. What motivated you to write this book?
Well, we work with leaders every day, helping them with their teams, helping with performance, and being better leaders. And part of that is there are people that don't listen well. There are people that ignore people. There are people that get too angry. And so, sort of correcting some of those and softening those skills so that the best comes out, right? How smart someone really is.
Right. So those qualities you just cited don't sound particularly approachable. So can you tell us what approachability is?
Right. Well, it's the effect you have on others about how you make people feel. So if you make people laugh, if you make people feel comfortable, if you acknowledge people, people tend to open up and warm up a little bit.
And can you give us some qualities that an approachable person might have?
Sure. Being curious, being open, being friendly, handling conflict.
And your approach to approachability is this quality in the workforce. So how might this quality be different in the workforce than in just everyday life, outside of work?
Well, people can get in trouble in their personal lives also. They could be having a party, they can be, well, here's a good example. When people have holidays, right? You see a lot of people running around getting stressed, right? And by the time they answer the doorbell and the people come in the door, their family is, very uncomfortable with them, from yelling at them, why didn't you get this done, telling them things that are negative. So people aren't aware that even in your personal life, you can turn people off.
So the audience listening now, they might want to know maybe if they're approachable. So I think you have a test in this book. Could you give us some of the questions that one might ask to determine whether you're approachable or not approachable?
Sure. Can you go to an event and not have a role and just be comfortable with others that you don't know? If you're busy and you're working on a deadline or a project, can you be interrupted and more than once and be polite and open? When you're handling stress and you've got a lot on your plate and you're managing lots of things, can you still be civil with people? Right?
Yeah. And I think you have a very brief test in the book, a 6-minute test.
6 seconds.
A 6-second test. Tell us what that is.
Yes. Well, that was just that we figured out that at our company, someone could walk in the door to go get executive coaching, and our receptionist would know within 6 seconds, essentially by how they were treated. Right? Is someone walk in? Are they open? Are they polite? Are their heads down? Right? So really, it's just an idea of the people around you. There's always one person in every environment that can quickly pick up on what's happening with others.
So that's often the receptionist.
Right.
Yeah. So I've never really been in a corporate, I've never worked in a corporate situation, and I'm not exactly familiar with what goes on there, except that I don't think I'd like to work in one. But why is approachability so important in a corporate environment or in the workforce?
Especially during these times, managers leaders are being asked to do more, right? So they have to have less staff and get more done. So they have to have people follow them. So part of getting them to do, get what they want, that's why I called it the key to influencing others. If you want something from people, you can't turn them off, right? So if I come to you and I say, I'm really mad at you, you're doing a bad job in the work that you're doing, right? That's not necessarily going to motivate you to right now listen to me, go along with me. So it's the ability to finesse, tough situations sometimes, giving critical feedback, telling someone, I want you to do more work possibly. They need to have a certain charm, they need to have a certain ability to influence that person.
Right. Now, can you give us some examples of what approachable people are and what maybe some examples of people who aren't quite so approachable? Now,
Sure.
I can't help but I watch TV.
Right.
And so give us some examples of, let's say, an approachable person from someone we might know on TV.
That's right. So you're thinking of Bush, you're thinking
No, I'm
of
not
Obama.
thinking of Bush. Well, I was thinking of Obama as approachable.
Yes, let's take those contrasts,
sure,
right?
sure.
So Bush looks very approachable, right? He's got the all-American apple pie and Chevrolet, and he's quoting, scripture, and he's looking friendly. But truth be told, he was kept out of a lot of meetings. If you see the movie and you read a little bit about him.
The movie W?
Yes, because he really wasn't that interested in listening. He did sort of what I call pseudo intimacy. Open at first and having some easy parts to play, and then otherwise, they didn't give him a lot of information at times. So take the opposite of that, Obama, and you can see what he's doing. He's not adversarial. He's not overly preaching, right? He's not playing it up in sort of in a pseudo way.
Right. Watching Bush on TV, I thought, good God, what must it have been like to be in his administration? Were you working directly for him? I don't know if I could pull off the role of being approachable with him, seeing, what I see on TV.
Right, so you're talking about the extreme, right? So people that have approachability that tend to be too nice, right? Are you saying that there are problems with those people?
Well, no, what I'm saying is that I would be tempted to tell him what I thought of him.
Yeah.
To correct, he's incurious, he's stubborn. He got us into a war that wasn't necessary.
Right.
He alienated the country from the rest of the world. He didn't listen.
Right.
And I imagine that in order to keep your job in that kind of a milieu, you would have to be kind of disingenuous about yourself.
It's tricky, but that brings us exactly to when you have something difficult to say, it doesn't mean don't. I'm not saying do not say difficult things. I'm saying be open. So as I tell you something negative, I could say it in a soft way, like, I'd prefer it if you try doing this, or, have you thought about that? There are all kinds of ways his trusted advisors could have given feedback.
Could have given him feedback.
Yeah. They maybe weren't willing to risk it. They didn't want to handle the tension, whatever reasons it was. Maybe he didn't listen when they did.
Right.
So that's an example of all kinds of managers and leaders that are out there in today's companies.
And I imagine with Obama, you would feel comfort in just giving heartfelt expression to how you feel.
That's right.
Because when I see him on TV,
you feel inspired.
Yeah, and I feel that he's interested in how I really feel, not in some fiction.
Yeah, so that he is the ideal of good leadership and good approachability.
Right. I think in the book you mentioned some other people. You mentioned Hillary Clinton.
Hillary Clinton and Palin. Okay, if we look at those two people, Palin, was sort of sarcastic and sort of cheeky, and even though she was trying to be strong and appeal to, mothers and disabilities and many other types, she had little quirks and little behaviors that were off-putting. Did you notice that when you?
I did.
Yeah. So this is an example of someone trying to be approachable, but there are other parts of their personality leaked out.
Right. So how can you teach people to be approachable?
I know it sounds like it'd be tough, huh? Well, I teach people to ask more questions and be sort of other-oriented. So as you ask me questions, that's being focused on others. Many people are very self-centered, and they don't think about talking to others, even their own employees, right? CEOs can just talk at people, not with people. So I teach people to ask questions and listen. and then how to reflect back. And I hear what you're saying. I hear what you're talking about.
Right.
Just skills, reflective listening, positive inquiry, and even conflict.
So let's talk about that, conflict. What happens when approachability when, let's say, a manager is unapproachable? What can happen in the workplace?
So when I'm with them one-on-one, I'm actually teaching them to look at why did they react the way they did. So if they got mad and they couldn't listen, we try to figure out what their triggers are, sort of what situations set them up to not be resourceful. And basically you can train people how to stay present and how to want to hear bad news or difficult situations and stay sort of calm.
Right.
Calm, listening, patient, tolerant.
Yeah.
Those are all sort of words I think of as being approachable.
Yeah, and people are spending more and more hours in the workplace, so essentially work is almost like home in a way. I mean, the time span is stretched out.
Right.
And I imagine that there are going to be some people who get on your nerves. So let's say someone has hurt you. How does a consummate person who has developed a sense of approachability, how does he handle a sense of hurt?
Right. So many people, even if they're high-level positions, will avoid that person. They will go around that person. They will begin to sabotage that person. But if they can actually learn that good leadership means that they learn to deal with that person, they can come and say, hey, Mel, you know, in the meeting the other day, you obviously didn't listen to some of my ideas. I think you put down my team, the way you were talking, and I want to talk to you about that. I want to find a way for us to collaborate, to be on the same page, and I don't want to have to avoid you.
Right, and it's necessary because it's with spending so much time in the office, it's essentially like you're living at home, so you've got to get along with these people.
Absolutely, it becomes more, people usually ask, why do companies shell out the money for coaching? It's because to have a team that won't listen to their leader, or to have a leader who doesn't know what their team is doing, that's costly to the company.
So let's say someone gets on your nerves and you just blot them out. You just write them off.
Right.
So that does something to the psychological atmosphere that everybody can feel.
Absolutely. In a meeting, at a party, at an event, you can tell when people don't like each other, right? I mean, it's pretty hard to hide it. Not being friendly, not being open.
Yeah, someone has resentment towards someone, or if they feel hurt and they realize that, maybe they don't realize it, but they maybe sense it's essential to forgive this person for hurting them. Why is it so difficult to forgive them?
Well,
sometimes?
I like to think of it as you're having to make a bridge. If we need to get something done because we're paid to work together, then it doesn't do any good to ignore you. It doesn't do any good for me to do it all. In other words, we can get more done. So I need to work with you. So I need some skills to be able to get you to come along. Right.
And I've been through this myself. I've been upset with people, and it's easy to write them off as being a little bit lunatic or crazy.
Right.
They may be.
Right.
But nevertheless, you've got to work with them.
Right.
And what does it take to nudge people or to get it through to them that there might be another point of view other than their own? I mean, that's hard to...
I think it can be anyone. It can be their boss. It can be their human resource person. It can be a subordinate. Again, it's the how. It's when you go to speak to the person, are you fuming, angry? I mean, I've been there myself where I tried to go confront someone. I didn't use good skills, and it backfired. So it can be anyone as long as they're going to be respectful in the way they try to get someone to listen, right? So if I say to you, you never listen and you're terrible and you're not any good anyway.
Makes you look bad.
Right, and it's not an approach that's going to work. So really, it's learning how to rein you in. You know that saying, you get more flies with honey?
Right.
That's it, right? It's just today's leadership is companies are pressing for leaders to try to use honey to get what they want.
Right. Well, I have to confess, though, when I first read your book, it's so compressed.
Yes.
There's no room for, meandering ideas. You get people.
Right.
And you've used sentences in there that have actually kind of thrown me back.
Okay.
I mean, they're blunt.
Yes.
If you want to be woken up, I suggest you read this book.
Yes.
Some things you said really got to me, but that's how you get to people. With simplicity, I would think.
Yeah, they need it simple, and people in business are very, very smart, and they want to get something quick,
Yeah.
right? And so you need to teach them, how do you handle this conflict quickly, and let's do it for the company,
Yeah.
right?
So a company can go into crisis when the interpersonal relations break down, and there's a lack of approachability skills. Give us an example of what would happen in a crisis situation where there's a big blow up and the poison spreads throughout the psychological atmosphere.
So
how does one cope with bringing things back down to peace again, and so that people can interact as kind of an extended family?
Yeah, so that's happening right now. Companies are laying off, people are getting let go, and as that happens, people get scared and anxious and freaky, and they begin to criticize each other and compete with each other. And what companies need to think of is tapping people on the shoulder and saying, you are the leader here, and I want you to go talk to your people, be real, be honest, be approachable, be authentic, and say, we're having tough times, and this is what we need to do. But basically to give sort of a positive goal out to their people. And so, like I said, anyone can go to a manager and say, you know, you're a leader, let's have a positive thought right now.
Right. And I think I read somewhere in your book that actually vulnerability is strength. When let's say a person realizes, hey, maybe, you know, I haven't been doing this very well, or maybe I have such and such a weakness. When they realize that is the beginning of healing for themselves. But when they express that to other people, what happens?
Well, admitting a mistake is such a great example of what sometimes leaders don't do. It's magical, really, when someone can say, I didn't handle that well. You can't believe how many bosses I teach them just that simple line of saying, I didn't handle that very well. Because what that does is that creates the trust again. It builds a bridge, and it says, you know, I'm not perfect, because I think a lot of us are trained to hide our flaws, right? To be strong, and this is, you know, make conclusions and be tough. And, you know, people don't always fall for that. It doesn't open people up. So being able to be vulnerable, as you used the words, is being able to say, you know, I've been thinking about this, and maybe I've been too tough on you, this team, or maybe I haven't spent enough time with this team listening. Right? So it's being able to admit some vulnerable aspects so that people can relate to you.
Are there times when being vulnerable is not appropriate?
Well, sure, if you go to the extreme, if you, you know, fall apart so others have to take care of you, but you know, that doesn't happen too much, but people can get unapproachable in other ways. They can get angry. Right?
Are there reasons why people just don't get the value of approachability, or the steps that you talk about?
Yeah.
Talk to us about that.
So a lot of people just, like I said earlier, they're self-centered, and they don't care. They don't care how they come off, right? They like being tough, or they like that they get things done. They like that they don't take a lot of time with people. And so they're living in a bubble, and no one's popped it. Right? And so
where would they get that idea?
Well, so companies have this thing called the 360 survey, and it's basically management, peers, and subordinates taking a quick little survey. Takes 5 minutes, and out comes a report that says, you don't listen well to others. You don't give critical feedback well. You aren't a team player, right? And so the feedback is what people really need to sort of wake up sometimes.
But that has to be done very gently. I mean, that could be pretty off-putting for a person who doesn't have the sensitivity to get it to begin with.
Sure, but it's companies' jobs now to train their HR and their leaders and their managers to then give that feedback.
Right.
I mean, can you imagine what it's like to have a company where no one handles conflict? I mean, that's problematic for the company.
That sounds pretty awful.
Well, that's why executive coaching was born. That's why, because they thought, we don't know what to do with this person, and he's running our company.
Yeah. Can you give us maybe one example of someone who was unapproachable, and then because of your intervention skills, he changed in such a way so that the company became far more pleasant to work in?
Sure, and productive.
And productive.
Right. Well, I can think of a CEO, but I won't mention the company. He didn't get along with his peers, and when he finally rose up to be the CEO of the company, he ignored his peers. So when the meetings were over, he wouldn't talk with his colleagues. He ran to his office and he hid, basically. And so we said to him, look, what good is it if you're the CEO of the company if you can't influence anyone to your ideas? Right. And so
how was his problem brought to your attention?
We were working already in the company with some of the team members, and they complained.
Oh.
And sometimes the human resource person will come, or another person at the executive table will say, yeah, he never, comes to meetings, or he, doesn't really ask us what we think. It happens at all levels, this unapproachability.
Yeah. Let's say that someone is in a corporation. I imagine there are some people who just don't belong in corporations. Is that true?
Right, they don't, but they don't know it, yes.
Yeah. What are they like?
Well, I would say at the extreme, you think of the engineer who sits and he's programming all day, and it's sort of okay. Companies want him to be productive, heads down, looking at the work, doing the programming and the coding. Well, but the rest of the time there are meetings he needs to go to and communicate what he's coding and programming.
Right.
Well, that's problematic to not have this person communicate, right? And so we see many of these people being brought into coaching because they need to communicate their ideas, what they finished, what they worked on, what they don't like, what's not going to work, what the bugs are, right?
Yeah.
So it becomes critical to have communication skills, right?
Yes. One thing that kind of bugs me is that, let's say you're in a corporation and you see something that really isn't working, and that people just don't want to talk about because they're afraid of losing their jobs.
Right.
And so there's a kind of a conspiracy to
sabotage?
to keep the flaw going.
Okay.
By not talking about it. And so if a person gets up and says, hey, I'd like to share with you what I see happening, what would happen?
Well, so the colleagues tend to complain to each other. That is true. They will.
I mean, what if this person cites a legitimate gripe that there's something really dysfunctional in this company, and he's becoming more and more vocal about it. No one is listening to him. Maybe his input about what's wrong with this situation would actually help the company.
Yes.
And it's not that he wants to be unapproachable. He'd like to be approachable,
Right.
but no one is listening.
That's right.
Because the corporation or the group is kind of neurotic or dysfunctional.
Yeah.
So how does such a person cope?
Well, we'd sit down with that person and we say, we know you're trying to help the company. We know you're trying to lead the people. You have good ideas. Your ideas need to get across. But there's something in the way that you're talking that's turning people off. And so let's try to figure that out. And we'd explore, you know, what do you think is off-putting? And, that's why the surveys help. But I can tell in a few minutes that maybe they don't have a sense of humor, maybe they don't have enough of the sort of good qualities to draw people in, right? We go back to Obama. He's got so many qualities that make him easy to listen to, right? And so it's about balancing our personalities and our communication skills so people want to listen. So I would help him if he had a speech to talk with. I'd help him figure out how to lighten it up, how to be relatable, how to say things that are interesting. So that idea that maybe he's telling his ideas and they're lecturing or they're boring, right? That's what we'd be fixing.
Right. But maybe after some time, and he developed a way to present his ideas in an approachable way, and the company was still on a self-destructive mode and would not listen because they were afraid of losing their jobs, then what?
Well, that's where the managers come in, the directors, the vice presidents.
And if they're in it?
Well,
the reason I bring this up is because I know of such organizations, and they have to implode. They have to collapse before everyone says, my God, how could I have been so blind? I've actually seen those. Have you?
Yes, I have. There are negative companies, but again, back to leadership, the whole idea of leadership coaching, executive coaching, team buildings are to get more and more people having the skills. So
Right.
it's not one person, it's not just the HR, it's not just the CEO, it's not just the salesperson, right? You have, so it's training people, really.
Right.
Training people to, you know, be social at work.
Laura, you love your job.
I love my job.
Why?
It's fun. I get to see all kinds of companies grappling with all kinds of problems.
And you get to meet some pretty interesting people.
Very interesting. Very interesting.
Right. You've just recently moved from your offices in Mountain View to Sunnyvale?
Right, after 20 years, 25 years, we moved to Sunnyvale.
And what's that been like?
It's great. We're right next to Yahoo and Cisco and all these companies, and so it's fun.
Where would you like to see your company go from here?
I'd like to have more companies talking about conflict resolution. I'd like to have more CEOs sponsoring the way, and vice presidents. I mean, really, back to corporate social responsibility. They're in a leadership role, right? If you're a vice president, you're in the role already. So you might as well make the ride a good one for people, right? Bring them along, get them really engaged in the work.
Right.
So many people, there's a saying, people join companies and they leave managers.
Yes?
The whole point of that is they may like the work and they may like the product, but they may hate their boss.
Oh.
And that's a big problem, right?
So, approachability, and that's
Right.
what you're doing.
Right.
Yeah, Laura, I think our time is just about up. So, do you have one brief thing to say before we close the show?
I'd say get feedback, find out what your flaws are, and find out if they're showing, and get someone to work with you. It's easy to do.
Okay. We'll talk about this after the show. You can tell me what I'm doing. Okay.
Right.
Would you do that?
If you ask me to.
Okay. Thank you for being on the show, Laura.
Sure.
So, I think the show has been really intriguing. I think a lot of you out there can relate to it, both in your work environments and perhaps even at home. So, go with it, and I'll see you next time. Thank you for watching.